Control Players Unite.
Welcome back, Control Nation. I'm your host, Dr. Red. This video is a presentation on the question, how many kinds of control style decks exist in the Pokémon TCG? Please note, ladies and gentlemen, this video is a guide intended to help you think through your own deck building for deeper enjoyment. It is also here to help us classify decks in an orderly fashion. New terms are constantly popping up with various layers of nuance. There are a myriad of ways to categorize decks, and I will showcase the most common. Please add your own in the comments, and the following applies to the standard format. Now, this question of how many kinds of control style decks exist is a tricky one to answer because of how Pokemon players think about the contents and goals of their decks. In other words, in what ways do players categorize their decks? For example, we have 16 different ways to control in the Pokemon TCG, so one could argue the number of control style decks is simply that, 16, at least if you're focusing on one at a time. But there are other ways to categorize decks, of course, such as by playstyle or win condition. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we could separate these into two categories, but in the Pokemon TCG, I find that they melt together most of the time, so we're going to keep them that way. First, we have aggressive, wherein we win by taking prizes. Second, control, where we frustrate and/or outvalue our opponent's resources. Third, mill, where we deplete our opponent's deck. But then we combine them into aggro control, control mill, aggro mill, and aggro control mill, giving us 7 distinct playstyles and win conditions, 4 of which are control style. Another consideration is whether the deck is meta or anti-meta. Meta decks are the major, most powerful archetypes players will play at a given time, usually in a tournament, and these are in contention for the best deck and format. Off-meta decks are any of the below. A meme deck is one played strictly for enjoyment that has no reasonable chance of performing well in a tournament. A rogue deck is one that probably does not have a chance to perform well in a tournament, but does have answers to at least some of the major archetypes, and so it could perform well. But then you have anti-meta decks, which are made to directly combat top-tier meta archetypes. These decks theoretically can become popular enough to be regular meta decks, or one can think of them as some variation of off-meta because for whatever reason they haven't reached meta status. And then we have budget decks, which are those that materially cost below a certain amount, such as 50 quid, but there is no official number. The idea is that the deck is for players without much money. Budget, however, is not about gameplay, and so we will ignore it. There are also troll decks. A troll deck is one that employs an annoying strategy, usually a gimmick, to occasionally defeat meta status decks, but generally has no business winning in a regular tournament, though the term has some subjectivity according to what players consider troll. These decks employ the 16 methods mentioned earlier, so the gameplay is not understood in any new or significant way. I only mentioned troll and budget decks to be as comprehensive as possible. Another consideration is whether the deck is turbo or not turbo. Turboing refers to powering through one's deck quickly, usually in order to take a knockout. A deck either is turbo or is not turbo. Another consideration is the deck's prize status. A single prize deck is one that utilizes only Pokemon worth a single prize if knocked out. A multi-prize deck is one that utilizes Pokemon worth 2 or more prizes, such as EXs or VMAXs. Another consideration is the status of attacking Pokemon, or at least one the pilot desires to sit in the active spot, such as Block Snorlax. Such a deck has only one attacking Pokemon, like Iron Thorn's EX, a partner Pokemon that can equally attack, such as Arceus Giratina, or a whole slew of attackers like in a toolbox deck. One might also think of Miraidon EX as falling into this category, as 3 or more lightning Pokemon can equally attack in a Miraidon build. Another consideration is the deck's rulebox status. Does the deck have Pokemon with ruleboxes, whether single or multi-prize? A deck either does or does not have rulebox Pokemon. Another consideration is the deck's evolution status. Does the deck have Pokemon that evolve? A deck either does or does not have evolution Pokemon. That means, with these categories in mind, we can now calculate how many kinds of control style decks there are in the Pokemon TCG. Now, we originally said there were 7 playstyles or win conditions, but only 4 of them have control as part of their classification, so we count it as 4. Meta status has 4, which is comprised of meta, off-meta meme, off-meta rogue, and anti-meta. Speed has 2 classifications, Prize has 2 classifications, Attacker Status has 3 classifications, Rulebox has 2 classifications, Evolution has 2 classifications, and there are 16 methods of control, focusing on only one at a time. So that gives us an equation, 4 times 4 times 2 times 2 times 3 times 2 times 2 times 16, equaling 12,288 different kinds of control style decks. If that's too much, ladies and gentlemen, you can simplify it any number of ways for yourself, such as focusing only on playstyle win condition and methods, giving us a total of 64 kinds of control style decks. Or again, you can stick to the original 16 and call it a day. Thank you for watching, ladies and gentlemen. What did I miss? Where am I wrong? Please leave a comment. Take care of yourselves, and may God hold you in the palm of his hand.